Tonight, you arrive in rain-bright Greenwich Village on Halloween night of 1926, a delivery clerk for a small Italian grocer guiding a modest cart through electric light and paper pumpkins toward number 47 Sullivan Street. If you enjoy this gentle journey, please consider subscribing. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin our quiet walk past wet stoops and soft jazz, where pumpkin candles smoke, teacups, and the muted shuffle of patrolmen ease your thoughts into rest. The shop settles into its evening rhythm as you wipe the counter and take stock of what remains. Sacks of flour lean like pale hills along the wall, and a pyramid of oranges glows softly under a single electric bulb, their skins releasing a faint citrus as you shift the display. The hand-cranked adding machine ticks and chuffs when you turn it, the figures steepling neatly on a paper ribbon that smells faintly of ink. Customers come in with damp wool coats and leave trails of street mist, the bell above the door answering each arrival with the same soft note. You tie parcels with string, the knots learned in childhood and perfected here, a cross, a pull, a snug twist that holds. From the back room drifts the scent of coffee, old crates and sawdust, and beneath it all lingers the sweetness of fruit and the dry whisper of flour. You breathe it in the way you breathe a place you know well, feeling the small machine of the shop hum around you as Halloween darkens outside. The owner watches from his ledger, a cautious man whose gentleness sits slightly ajar from his caution, like a door not quite closed. He asks after your mother's cough and reminds you to mind your hands in the cold. Yet his glance flicks now and then to the back room, where the floorboards can be pried up if need be. He came up through tight times, you understand, and like many in Italian and Irish blocks, he learned to keep a store honest enough for daylight, while letting it serve, discreetly, a thirst that the law pretends does not exist. Under the Volstead Act, in force from 1920 through 1933, liquor is forbidden and therefore everywhere, moving along small chains of trust that thread groceries, tailors, candy shops, and quiet basements. Newspapers carry public health warnings about wood alcohol dressed up as gin, and you have watched your employer read them with a frown that never quite resolves into action. Tonight he closes the ledger and taps a crate labeled tonic syrup, the word stenciled tidy but broader than truth, and asks you to take it to number 47 Sullivan Street. Before the party starts, he says, not unkind but firm, and don't linger this time, as if lingering invites the bad luck that already lives in every shadow. Outside, the city wears rain like a second skin, and the lights make a bright script on the wet cobbles that you read with your feet as you push the cart. Trolley rails shine like metal rivers, and the shop windows line the street like lanterns, each one advertising bread, boots, cigars, or a dentist's mild assurances, all the ordinary lures of a lawful life. Reformers have spent the last decade coaxing Halloween toward gentler habits, and you can see the work of settlement houses and ward clubs in the paper streamers, freckling stoops, and the flyers pasted to lamp posts promising community parties in church halls. The old cabbage-throwing and gate-lifting mischief has been taxed into parade, they say, and you pass a small marching line of children who hold paper lanterns and wear simple masks cut from cardboard, the eye-holes uneven and charming. They try out a phrase that has begun to slip into urban newspapers in these mid to late 1920s, the syllables jaunty and new to your ear. Trick or treat, they call, though they do not pause for a treat from you, only wave and scatter like sparrows. The alleyways retain their own script, however, a quiet notation of cider and gin, a wink of a door where a bell does not ring, but a knock is answered, and the rain keeps its counsel over all of it. You keep to the middle of the street where the light holds, the cart steady under your hands, and you feel the city's compromise with itself in every glowing pane. As you move south, the neighborhood tips into that steady beat the police keep, the regularity of fixed posts and patrols that make the streets predictable even when they are not. 2 patrolmen stand outside the precinct, their slickers beading raindrops, and you give them a nod. They return with practiced neutrality, which is its own kind of blessing. Across the way, a newsboy thumbs through a damp stack, his lips move it as he counts, while from an open second-story window a typewriter rattles in a nearby newsroom, its staccato run broken by the ding of a carriage you can almost see. The inked pages smell like fresh metal and pulp, and you imagine the headlines already in place. A municipal budget, a ball game, the routine raids where teacups grow suspicious in photographs. A phonograph leans out of a tenement's window on a ribbon of jazz. Not loud, just a brushed whisper of cymbal and a trumpet's muted vowel, the music tasting of coffee and lint and a holiday with its shoes off. You pass a candy shop whose front case is diligent with licorice and peppermints, and yet the notes of laughter behind the curtain carry a different grain. There are many such rooms tucked behind legitimate counters, little annexes of the city's appetite. You do not pause, not from fear, but because a delivery done promptly earns you sleep, and the thought of your rain-damp apartment with its single gas stove and tin kettle stands at the back of your mind like a small, warming star. By the park, pumpkins collapse gently into themselves, their candle smoke mixing with wet leaves and coal, and a streetcar's bell threads the intersection with a patient warning. The rain eases into a woolly mist that clings to your sleeves and smooths the edges of buildings, and the faces you pass are friendly in the way city faces are when everyone is damp and no one wishes to make a fuss. You notice how the newest street lamps hold their islands of light without flicker, a comfort the older ones never managed, and how the pavement repairs have trimmed most of the puddles into modest mirrors where neon signs double and blur. A boy in a newsprint mask salutes you with a toy sword made from a lath strip, and you raise 2 fingers in reply, a secret handshake between those on errands and those at play. Somewhere to your left a siren unwinds, distant and unhurried, perhaps an ambulance or a fire wagon, but it fades before it arrives, and the city inhales again. You think of the warnings pasted at the grocers about wood spirits and denatured blends, and you think of how everyone mostly minds their own glass, and you let the thought pass because you are carrying only what the label insists. The cart's wooden wheels find their line, the crate rides without complaint, and you angle toward Sullivan Street, your steps measured, your breath a steady fog in the softening air. At the corner, you pause long enough to adjust the strap at your wrist, and in that small stillness you read the street like a familiar letter. Electric light pries gold from the wet stone, and laundry lines in the narrow gap between buildings tremble under little pennants of moisture, each droplet a steady metronome of fall and shiver. The storefronts follow one another in a disciplined parade. Barbers and bakers, a tailor hunched like a question mark over a suit, a print shop with Halloween handbills curling in its window. And you notice how solid their fronts look, how assured, even as you know some of them open like books with secret chapters. A woman shepherds her children past with paper hats tilting and a painted cat face slipping in the drizzle, and they talk in excited whispers about a community party where there will be cocoa, apples, and songs to drown out mischief. You feel the street's old ghost and its new manners walking arm in arm, neither winning, both necessary, the city keeping its balance the only way it knows how. Your palms are warm on the handle, the crate steady as a promise, and you turn down toward Sullivan Street with the rain now only a breath, your thoughts quiet but attentive, as if listening for the next doorbell and the next chapter's knock. You arrive at number 47 Sullivan Street with the crate balanced against your hip, and the first thing you notice is the glow behind the curtains, a low amber that turns the rain on the steps into a sheet of gold. A doorman in a simple domino mask opens before you can knock, his evening coat dark with weather, and his voice the polite murmur of someone who belongs both here and out on the stoop. Inside the narrow entry, the air carries pumpkin candle smoke and damp wool, and an umbrella stand bristles with polished canes, and a single parasol beaded with drops. Paper pumpkins watch from a small table by the stair, their faces gentle rather than gaudy, the cutouts softened by the flicker of tea lights set deep in their bellies. You shift your weight, and he nods towards the rear, to a hallway that leads past a parlor where laughter lifts and falls like a tide. You feel the house measuring you, neither welcoming nor suspicious, simply appraising the ordinary cargo a clerk might carry. You pass under the arch and leave the soft rustle of the entry behind, the crate's corner knocking lightly against your coat as you move. The hallway is long and modest, and wet paper streamers cling to the baseboards where their paste has surrendered to the weather. On the runner your shoes hush, the nap worn smooth by years of cautious footsteps and careful parties, the kind that take place in plain sight and pretend not to exist. Beyond the tall window to your left, the street lights pour their clean electric light across the village, a quiet miracle of modernity that turns rain into ribbons and gives the beat cop a clear view of every stoop. You think of the ward's safe Halloween parade that marched before dusk, a city reformer's answer to mischief, paper lanterns and school banners replacing ash can fires and soaped windows. In the stairwell you can still hear a child testing the new phrase, trick or treat, half whispered, half proud. Parties like this one borrow that respectability, turning tea into a signal and the parlor into a room that can be denied if need rises. The Volstead law has trained people to speak softly and carry porcelain. You breathe in and keep moving, the smell of floor polish and damp crepe mixing with the faint sweetness of oranges that clings to your sleeves from the shop. The parlor opens to your right, and the music meets you first, a trio playing something light enough to pass as background, yet steady enough to keep the conversation afloat. A pianist in a crescent moon mask leans into a progression of warm chords. A cornet wears a mute that turns each note into velvet, and the drummer's brushed snare whispers a heartbeat that never startles, only guides. Costumed guests migrate between settees and the fireplace, their masks simple, an owl's cut paper, a black cat's profile, chosen less for disguise than for the shared joke of wearing them. They drink from teacups held like passwords. You catch a slice of talk about a gallery on Washington Place, another thread about a cousin in the Bronx, and over it all the polite clink of saucers settling back onto the tray. The host finds you in motion, a tall man with hair slicked back, his accent the smooth glide of uptown money, and his eyes attentive without being inquisitive. He says to take the crate to the pantry, kindly and brisk in the same breath, as if those two tones were made to live together. You nod and obey, a shadow among the costumes, and the trio's melody follows you down the next stretch of hall like a promise to keep the evening intact. The pantry sits just off the kitchen, a modest room lined with shelves that carry the ordinary inventory of a city household. Sacks of flour, tins of biscuit, jars of imported olives, a wrapped loaf, a wedge of cheese under a net, soap stacked like bricks. The smell greets you before the rest of it registers. A faint iodine metal note that doesn't belong, tucked beneath the warmer scents of ground coffee and fresh bread and the last of the summer tomatoes. Against the far wall another crate waits, the twin of yours down to the penciled tonic and the knots in the twine, except that one corner shows a dark dampness and a shine under the single bulb where something has leaked. You know enough not to touch it, but knowledge arrives anyway, quiet and unsummoned. In these years of prohibition, liquor comes by back door and basement still, cut and recut, the provenance a chain of whispers, and sometimes wood alcohol slips where grain spirit should be. City coroners have put warnings in the papers more than once, somber paragraphs about holiday tables and bottles that were never meant for a dinner, tales of blurred sight and sudden collapse that editors set between election news and the society pages. You stand with your hands at your sides and listen, the room steady around you, and the metal in the air threading the moment with a thin line of risk. From this little square of shelves and tile, the house sounds intimate and contained, like a phonograph close to your ear. The trio's rhythm filters through the wall with unhurried confidence, and cups tap saucers with the soft authority of porcelain. Rain whispers on the rear steps beyond the kitchen door, a steady patter that turns to steam when it meets the iron railing and then lapses back into water again. Somewhere nearby an icebox releases a slow drip. Slow, then slower, measuring the minutes with a patience that would survive a power outage because the house has not trusted any new machine to keep its food cold. You hear the doorman at a distance, his shoes squeaking on marble, a code you understand in the same way you understand the folded bills that sometimes ride folded under a string of receipts. In the tidy repetition of these domestic noises is the skeleton of a city that maintains its posture with conventions and euphemisms, a place where a parlor masquerades as a tea room while the pantry holds a ledger of other intentions. You shift the crate onto your knee and steady it against the wall, feeling the twine cut gently into your palm, and you picture your employer's careful face, the way he speaks of syrup without needing to defend the word. You lower your delivery beside its sibling, lining up labels as if alignment could promise safety, and you find yourself noticing the neatness of the pencil strokes, block letters on the side slat, a small flourish on the final P. The knots are square and practical, pulled with the tidy confidence of a man who ties 1,000 parcels a year and for a heartbeat you are back at the counter, tying bags of chestnuts for a woman with a child who cannot stop staring at the oranges stacked like suns. The damp corner of the other crate throws a faint glimmer under the bulb, and you draw your hand back. Not fast, just careful, as though the light itself could carry a sting. In this room of ordinary goods, the metallic odor sits like an unsigned note, and the mind runs ahead to the stories the papers print when a party unravels, blaming the nameless, calling it an accident, moving on as the presses turn. The door frame gathers the sound of the cornet and shapes it into a ribbon that slides across your shoulder and sends you to the threshold again. The host appears, more presence than movement, and he glances at the crates, then at you, and says in that smooth uptown cadence that he will settle the account with your employer tomorrow, an offhand promise that treats commerce and courtesy as the same coin. You nod because nodding is the safest language you know, and you make your way back toward the parlor, your step soft enough to remain unremarked. The house receives you into its polite brightness once more, and the trio has loosened into a tune with a touch of rag in its bones, quick in the middle, gentle at the edges. Guests lift their teacups and smile over their rims, and you pass as a piece of furniture moved from one corner to another, a necessary shape that does no harm, and asks for none. From outside, faint and far, comes the rumble of a wagon and the distant hiss of tires on wet pavement, and for a breath the night beyond the curtains presses its damp nose to the glass. You feel the warmth of the rooms fold around you, a practiced hospitality that offers cover as well as comfort, its language centuries old and yet entirely modern. You are still unnoticed, which suits you, and the music draws you a step farther than you mean to go, into the place where conversation becomes blur, and the cornet's muted glow becomes the only sensible light. In your pocket the rough memory of twine scuffs your palm like a warning you intend to heed, and then the brushed snare lays down a quiet measure you cannot help but follow. You lean towards the hallway and let the melody carry you, the evening unbroken, the city's careful dance continuing on its soft-soled feet. The first sign that the party is slipping comes as a thinning of the melody, the saxophone's line drooping like a wet ribbon before the drummer's brushes hesitate. You are near the hall, the pantry door just behind you, when a teacup tips and the saucer clicks once against the parquet, a small sound that gathers a hush around it. Shoe soles scuff on the oriental rug, a rhythm of careful steps as people draw back, and a woman's feathered mask lowers as if it has grown heavier. The pianist lifts his hands and then sets them down again without striking, and in the breath that follows, you hear rain fret against the window panes and the quiet thread of voices braided with it. The host moves before alarm can take root, gliding between costumes with a calm that looks practiced, murmuring for air to be made, for space to be cleared, for the trio to keep to a lullaby. You stay where the wall meets the staircase shadow, the doorman's domino mask fixed in your periphery, aware of the teacups with their innocent porcelain disguises, and the way the lamps set the room aglow as if all of this were staged. Your sleeves carry the faint smell of oranges and flour from the shop, and under it the sharp memory of the pantry where an identical crate leaked a scent like metal and medicine, the kind that turns your tongue dry just to recall it. You browse the edge of the parlor with your eyes, and catch the fallen man's face before someone drapes a dark overcoat across him, an act as gentle as closing a book. He is Mr. Corvino, the man you have watched at dawn with a collar up and a brim down, stepping from the alley behind the grocer's like a shadow with errands. No one says his name aloud, but someone near the fireplace breathes the word poison, and another answers wood alcohol with the weary cadence of a headline. In these 1920s, papers run stories about methyl spirits that blind and still the heart, a public hazard born of bad distilling or denatured batches, and the words always seem to land with a shrug that calls it accident. The Volstead Act stands on the statute books, all ink and intention, yet its enforcement seems to bend with the curvature of the street. Precinct to precinct favours order over purity, calm over crusade. Police beats in neighbourhoods like Greenwich Village learn the steps as well as any drummer, knowing which doorways mean trouble and which mean livelihood. And sometimes the eyes that pass your cart pretend not to see. You think of the two patrolmen you nodded to earlier, and of how this parlour feels both protected and exposed, a stage lit by electric bulbs while the script is written in the shadows. The host tends the room with the discretion of a maitre d', who has weathered both storms and matinees, guiding guests into a library and a back sitting room, encouraging a spill of conversation to soften the edges. He signals the band with 2 fingers held low, and the trio resumes with a tune that folds in on itself, brushes shushing the drum's skin like rain on a storefront awning. Teacups move again, returned to hands that know their usefulness. China that reads respectable at a glance, sheltering something stronger with a cousin's recipe under the vanilla of tea. During Prohibition, private parties like this grow behind curtains and latch chains, polite gatherings in respectable homes where the door policies are coded in ordinary words, and a nod from a trusted doorman is as good as a password. The domino mask by the entry is theatrical, but the true disguise is in the routine. The pantry again, and the stacked crates that read tonic syrup when the ledger calls them something else. Outside, the city sponsors safe Halloween parades where children march with paper lanterns instead of roaming with chalk and soap. And yet inside these walls, the old traditions of quiet exchange carry on under the electric glare. You feel the village's modernity and memory braided together, the speaker humming on a wooden credenza as if to remind everyone that progress and pretense often share the same plug. You stand by the stairwell newel and count your breaths as the host approaches, his expression composed, his palm already closing around a folded bill he intends for your pocket. You let him press it into your hand, the paper warm from another's hold, the advice following in a low register that carries no threat, only a boundary. Best you forget this. The envelope sits on your lifeline like another lifeline, uncomplicated in weight and heavy in implication, and your cuffs stay damp where the rain crept up them on the walk over. You look past the host's shoulder and see the band leaders nod, the delicate way guests lower their eyes in agreement that night should continue, only softer. Outside, your memory runs the earlier street, the children's masks bright with fresh creases, voices learning the new American phrase trick or treat that has begun to find its way into city columns and school notices. Reform has a rhythm, too, with neighbourhood committees arranging parties in basements and parish halls, trading mischief for chaperoned dances, while here the reform pauses politely at the stoop and waits until morning. You think, without drama, that you work in the seam between the stitches, where law and custom meet and do not quite fuse, and you breathe as the host's hand leaves your arm. You ease along the hall and collect your coat, seeing again the pantry's shelves with their labelled tins and the second crate blotched where it seeps. The doorman inclines his head, a courtesy that says the evening has gone on longer than planned, and the latch chain lifts with a soft click that sounds, to you, like a punctuation mark placed carefully in a sentence. The band's music follows into the corridor like a lullaby from a nursery down the block, the clarinet rounding its notes as if they could be made kinder by curvature. On the stoop you pause beneath the awning, and the cool breath of the night meets you with pumpkin smoke and the clean bite of rain that has gathered pace while you were inside. Street lamps print ovals on the wet pavement, and far off a siren winds as though wrapped in felt, the noise swallowed by distance and brick. Somewhere beyond the row houses, a newsroom's typewriter clatters in fits. Small hammers making a pattern that could be the city translating itself. You step into the alley as the door's latch settles behind you, rain stippling your hat brim, and you know an untold story now walks beside you, keeping time with your feet. You turn north into the mist with the envelope cupped in your palm, and the street receives you with a softened kind of brightness. Electric lamps blur into halos on the wet pavement, and a row of carved pumpkins on a stoop sags at the edges where heat and rain have had their way. A sweet, smoky thread of candle wax drifts down the block and blends with the tannic breath of damp leaves piled along the curb. Children in oilcloth capes and homemade paper masks skip past in little flocks, whispering a phrase that still feels new to the city's mouth, trick or treat, learned from a neighbor or a morning edition somewhere out west. You have read that some newspapers have started printing those words in the mid to late 1920s, amused and curious, noting that the custom is catching on in cities, but not yet everywhere. The sound the children make is careful, like an experiment performed under watchful eyes, and you step aside so they can claim a rapt sweet from a tenant who leans out with a grin. You carry on with your head down as the rain beads on your hat brim and the jack-o'-lanterns breathe their small, brave light into the weather. Past the corner bakery, the community hall glows with the soft fatigue of a party nearly finished, and you slow to watch without stopping. Crepe paper streamers droop from ceiling to doorway, too tired to be festive, and a volunteer in a sash sweeps confetti into neat, patient piles. Inside, a few children, kept close by parents in their coats, hold paper cups of cider, the sour, sweet smell sliding into the street each time the door opens. This is the reformers' work. The city's attempt to trade pranks for parades, the progressive habit of giving structure to mischief so buildings keep their windows and neighbors sleep without ash cans overturned. The neighborhood parade that passed an hour ago has dissolved into small conversations and careful good nights, and the idea seems to have worked well enough, at least for one wet night. A hand-lettered sign promises safe Halloween, and you nod to it as if to an acquaintance who has earned your respect without demanding it. Tires breathe along the avenue, whispering over water, while somewhere upstairs a saxophone tests a scale, one note at a time, unhurried and unsure of its next song. The precinct house stands a few doors down, sturdy as a habit, and a police wagon idles at the curb in a mild cloud of exhaust that the rain immediately tames. Two patrolmen, hats tilted against the drizzle, exchange a look that is more conversation than words, their boots polished to a shine that catches the new electric street lights like tiny suns. Their beat is steady, their presence as much a part of the block as the lamp-posts and the hardware store cat, and you nod to them as you pass, though you do not offer your errand to their keeping. You know from many evenings that the city runs on these quiet accommodations, this tacit choreography in which everyone moves as if by an unwritten chart. They were not blind earlier. They merely chose a longer way of seeing, the way you have learned to look down when a side door opens after dark. You do not feel anger at them, only the weight of how the peace is kept, with silences carefully placed like sandbags against a flood. The wagon's engine purrs, a domestic sound, and the rain answers in a hush against its roof. From somewhere farther uptown comes the crisp, insect chatter of typewriters, a newsroom working through the evening, and you imagine the editors weighing the shape of a headline. There is a tidy phrase ready at their fingertips for a collapse at a party. A bootleg accident, described with a practiced sympathy and a note of civic concern for unregulated drink. Ever since the Volstead Act took effect in 1920, the city has learned the hidden pathways of thirst, and you have learned too, because a job is a job, and the world does not pause to make it cleaner for you. There have been warnings in the dailies about adulterated spirits, about wood alcohol and the ways it impersonates a celebration until the second glass, and the language of those warnings has grown familiar enough to blend with the weather report. Behind respectable windows the phonograph keeps spinning, and behind respectable counters the back room keeps its hour, and you understand that a steel grate and a polite smile can disguise anything the times require. Your own steps keep time with the saxophone's patient notes, and the city seems to listen with you, working out a melody that can hold these opposites without breaking. The envelope in your hand gathers your warmth and waits. Street by street, the village shows its new improvements the way a careful host sets out clean linens. Municipal lights strung in regular intervals. Storm drains free of trash because the sanitation trucks keep their schedule, and the brickwork of stoops repaired according to codes that do not bend. You pass a row of buildings with freshly painted numbers and a fire escape that looks sturdier than the memory of a decade ago, as if the city has decided that safety should be built into the bones. Even the alley where deliveries move has its own order now. Cans with lids, pickups announced by a bell each morning, and a notice from the board reminding tenants where to place the ash and where to place orange peels. Yet the same block can hold a front that smiles with compliance and a back door that accepts a crate with quiet hands, and you know that both doors belong to the same address. A grocer who sells flour by day can sell a sweeter liquid after the bell, and the ledger can carry both kinds of entries if no one asks for too much detail. Your own part in that arithmetic is modest but real, and you feel it as a kind of weather inside your coat, neither storm nor clear sky. You consider the station at your back and the party at your heels, and find that neither one feels like a place to stop. The thought of reporting drifts through you not as a plan but as a question, and you try to walk beside it without startling it. If you spoke, you would lose more than a night's sleep. You would test the patience of men who already know what they must not see, and you would break the long thread that keeps your rent paid and your door unlocked. The paper would call it the phrase it prefers, and the headline would close the file without touching the rooms where the decision was made or the hallway where a doorman waited with a mask and a list. You think of the host's steady voice, the band's obedient restart, the guests gathered back into laughter like a sheet shaken smooth, and you cannot say any one of them is a villain that you could point to with safety. The city's order asks for your silence in small coins, dropped one by one into an unseen box, and tonight is only another payment. You rehearse a sentence and then let it go as the saxophone repeats a low phrase and finds a kinder note than before. By the time the storefront of your building appears, shy and familiar, the rain has thinned to a lace of mist, and the back stair waits where it always does. You pause there with your hand on the railing, the envelope warmed by your grip, and listen to the block exhale. Somewhere a radio filters through a window, with a dance band mellowed by distance, and the newsroom's clatter has softened to a stray tap, like rain lingering in a gutter. The lamps along the alley sputter once, and then hold steady, casting the stair in a pale certainty that feels like a promise the city can actually keep. The garbage cans are neat, their lids set firm, and the oranges in the shop below will throw their fragrance up the well of the stair by morning, the peel bright against the flower dust. The speakeasy 2 doors over will close its peephole and its ledger line for the night, and the patrolmen will turn the corner on their route, boots shining in a last puddle. You have not decided anything, not really except to climb these steps and sleep where you are known, and to rise when the bell rings tomorrow. The music continues because it must in the slow roll of tires and the patient saxophone, and you understand that it will go on with or without your voice. You step upward, quiet as breath, while the city keeps time. In your narrow room above the shop, the night arranges itself in small domestic details that ask nothing more of you than attention. The gas stove fidgets with a steady blue, a thin flame that makes its own wind in the quiet, and you set your damp coat by the window where it steams and darkens the sill. The odor from below, orange peel, flower dust, old wood, and a hint of anise from the candy the grocer keeps by the register, climbs the stairwell like a recipe that never quite finishes. Electric light from the street lifts and falls across the ceiling plaster, turning hairline cracks into silver streams and then leaving them be. The chair wobbles and settles when you sit. The table answers with a sigh from its joints, and the window pane quivers each time a car hisses through the wet. You place the envelope square on the wood, where it shines with rain fingerprints that are not yours, and you give it the space to be only paper for now. A moment unfolds as you breathe, and the air tastes slightly of match sulfur from the stove's earlier spark. The envelope sits like a decision you refuse to make, so you choose another task that feels like tidying your thoughts. You pull a grocer's invoice close, its columns ruled in blue, and its corners softened by pockets and counters, and you take a pencil stub from the cup with the bent spoons. You strike a match to see the graphite better, its yellow feather flickering against the edge of the page, and you write in a steady hand, Halloween, 1926. The city's masks fit better than faces. You look at the sentence and feel how it balances, not an accusation and not a plea, simply an account in a book only you will read. The stove door releases a mild burp of heat when you open it, and you hold the paper by one corner until the flame notices. The invoice blackens, then blossoms, curling inward the way a leaf curls under frost, and the letters flash brighter than the paper before the whole page dims into a nest of ash that folds on itself and lets go. The world beyond your window supplies a gentle chorus that asks nothing of you but listening, and you let it in. A saxophone moans from the alley, where the awning keeps the rain thin, the notes climbing and falling like someone testing a new reed, and laughter catches along the brick as if the walls pass it one to the other. Somewhere down the block, a phonograph stutters a foxtrot through a woolen needle hum, and overhead a siren unwinds and rewinds its ribbon of sound before disappearing into mist near the river. The draught carries the sweet smoke of a pumpkin candle that has gone to stump, and the smell of wet paper streamers, ink, dye, and rain, adds a faint schoolhouse tang. You hear newsprint slap a doorstep, and can almost see a reporter's typewriter chewing at an editorial about holiday safety, its keys striking like hailstones on tin. Children clip past in their masks, trying out the new phrase they learned from older boys, and a newspaper clipping, trick or treat, its syllables still unsure in their mouths, as if borrowing a hat slightly too big. On the avenue, a patrol wagon grinds by with chains that ring against the axle, and the beat cop does not look up, the way people do not look at weather they cannot change. The hour belongs to Prohibition, and you live inside its grammar with the calm of someone who has learned the rules by habit rather than faith. The Volstead Act has been the law since 1920, reaching into cellars, kitchens, and quiet back rooms like yours, and it will hold until repeal in 1933 returns liquor to the ledger of taxes and permits. But not tonight. Tonight, tea rooms pour coffee that steams like innocence and then pour something else that bites at the cup's rim. Soda counters keep a second syrup under the counter for those who know the password. And ordinary groceries trade in sweetness, staples, and on certain evenings, in the shadows that run between buildings. Small neighborhood operations in Italian and Irish streets stitch this system together. Drivers, clerks, musicians, and the men who make the deals. And you are a seam among many, competent and quiet. People whisper about wood alcohol, about batches that go wrong, about families who keep a bottle for celebration and wake up to headlines that say, bootleg accident, the tragedy folded into a phrase that makes misfortune sound bureaucratic. City reformers, unwilling to surrender the holiday to mischief, keep erecting their safe Halloween parades and schoolhouse parties with prizes for best paper lantern, and those efforts will spread year by year, even as the old alleyway habits linger in the folds. The new greeting, trick or treat, will travel and take root after this decade, finding itself on porches in the 1930s and beyond, until it becomes a ritual so ordinary that no one remembers when it sounded strange. You recognize that masks are arrangements as practical as aprons and ledgers, tools that let the city operate without showing its seams. When you carry a crate labeled tonic syrup, you serve both law and lawlessness, and in serving both you keep a balance that does not collapse tonight, or most nights. Police beats function because some doors stay closed as the officer passes. Shopkeepers prosper because some goods arrive without receipts. Families sleep because the noises outside agree to be called music and weather, rather than arguments and bargains. The lamps along the street make their own dawn every evening, and with every upgrade, every new bulb and cable, the shadows learn to rearrange themselves and keep the corners useful. You are part of that arrangement without rage and without pride, the way a hinge is part of a door's usefulness and noise. History in this light feels less like a verdict and more like a metronome. Progress and prohibition, innocence and guilt, each tapping its measure so the others know when to enter. At last you lie back and let the rain decide the tempo, the drip from the cornice striking the window ledge with the patience of a clock. The saxophone's wail loses its edge and becomes a line you can rest your breath upon, and the phonograph down the block winds down until the motor purr is louder than the tune. In the alley, someone tells a joke that carries only as cadence, and the laughter answers twice, then not at all. Greenwich Village breathes under wet electric light, the bulbs haloed by mist so that every doorway looks like a photograph of itself, and the streetcar at the corner sends up a blue spark that the rain forgives. On stoops, pumpkins settle into themselves, their cut smiles dimming into soft lantern ghosts that still scent the air with singed sugar. The city continues, measured and human, its disguises buttoned and loosened by turns, and the rhythm does not stop so much as grow quiet. You follow it into stillness, not ending and not beginning, like a tune that fades without ever quite deciding to be over. Outside your window, the night exhales. Rain smooths the rooftops, and the lamplight softens until it feels like a hush laid over brick and slate. You taste the faint tang of oranges and dust, the simple comfort of flour still in the creases of your sleeves. The little stove ticks as it cools, a patient metronome counting you back to stillness. The city changes by inches, and you have learned to hear those inches. You listen to the pipes hum and the streetcar's bell 2 avenues away, to the soft parade of footsteps on wet stone. Reformers have been busy, shaping the holiday with pageants and lantern walks, coaxing mischief into order. Children try out new syllables, trick or treat, a phrase imported, adjusted and tucked into the city's pocket like a lucky coin. It is the sound of the future clearing its throat, polite, a little uncertain, but eager to belong. Yet old customs trail behind, and the law casts long curving shadow. Since the Volstead Act turned the decade inward, respectable doors have learned double meanings. Teacups hide spirits, and respectable men learn to step lightly between statutes and necessity. Even the police know their roots by rhythm, a beat of observation, a beat of omission, then back again. In the distance, the newsroom's typewriter clatter fades, but you can still hear it as a weather of keys, news of seizures, of civic drives, of cautionary columns about wood alcohol and the dangers bottled by a hurried hand. None of it is loud tonight. Even the city's contradictions tread carefully, as if their shoes would squeak on the wet. The pumpkins have gone soft, but their smoke lingers like a lullaby, a thin thread of sweetness and ash. Somewhere a saxophone finds a phrase, slow and patient, a tune that doesn't ask for applause, only for time to unfold. You let the tune carry you, and it carries the streets with it. Parades bright as fresh copper, alleyways that keep their secrets, shop windows reflecting the shine of brand new lights. Progress and prohibition, innocence and cunning. They move together like dancers who learned the same steps in different schools. Masks that once were holiday dress become a habit of the age. Useful, almost courteous, a way to pass without jostling. You loosen your laces and set your boots side by side. The room takes your weight the way a harbour takes a boat. First a small sway, then calm. Through the cracked window sash, the rain becomes fine as thread, stitching night to morning. You breathe with it, steady and unhurried, feeling the city breathe with you, river tide and steam heat, flame to ember, echo to quiet. When sleep comes, it arrives like a careful doorman, not to question, only to open. You step through without hurry. The tune lowers its lantern, the masks hang still on their pegs, and the rain keeps its gentle tempo, promising that by dawn the pavements will shine clean again, and the world will be ready for your simple, honest steps.